we've got a great program. And we're going to kick that off with, I think, the one guy who broke through the ban on travel and conferences is Frank DiGiovanni, and he's here today. So somehow, and I will tell you, in OSD, you can look at his bio in the program, but I will tell you there is no more passionate advocate in the Pentagon, in that many-sided building, than Frank DiGiovanni and what simulation and training does for the readiness of our force. And he's also leading the way in these new and emerging kinds of technologies like virtual worlds and mobile applications and game-based types of training solutions. He's got a great big budget, but more importantly, he works the strategy and policy that will guide what Department of Defense does in the future in leveraging the technologies that you, industry, can deliver. So I think what you will hear from him today is you will kind of hear what he sees as the future, the initiatives that he's working directly on. But I think you can translate what he has to say into opportunity. Where DoD goes, the services will follow. And what Frank's biggest task is to make sure that the things that each of the services do can talk to each other at the end of the day. And that we can, at someday, integrate live, virtual, and constructive simulation all in one place and maximize the training benefit of all those technologies. So with that, please, how about a warm welcome for Frank DiGiovanni.
Tom is right on certainly one thing. I do have a tendency to buck the norm. So yes, I am one of the few people to have reached escape velocity from the Pentagon. But I'll tell you, it was very difficult to do. I have not been TDY since its hit. I've been nowhere since the first week in December. That's how locked down we are. On the big budget part, I do want to manage Expedition. Yes, my office does oversee a big budget. Unfortunately, none of that money is mine. So let me start out by adding my welcome to Tom's, to everyone here. I do want to kind of get an idea of who's here. So, I mean, how many people here are from industry? Just raise your hands. And how many of you are R&D people in industry? Interesting. How many, any government? Who's here from government? A couple of stragglers. So we also achieved escape velocity. Excellent. How about academia? Okay. International participants? It's easy to tell some of you. Any press? I see one in the back. And trade associations. Anybody from trade associations? So I wanted to do that so that as I speak, I kind of mold my comments to kind of your sector. So the first one is, and we were talking about this just before I came up here, there are no tourists here. And what I mean by tourists is a lot of times at conferences, people show up just to kind of be a tourist. But obviously, given where the DoD is, where the government is, everybody in here is not a tourist. You are dedicated, you're serious, and you want to make things happen. So even though there aren't a lot of government people here, I would encourage you all to dialogue. And you should dialogue about what did you have to say to your leadership that tipped the scales for you to be here? Because you need to share the best practices with each other. I mean, we probably didn't all use the same argument, but I want to know what you said, because I can take that back to my bosses and justify my participation the next time I come. We're on the, it's probably a personal joke, but hell, I'll try it anyway, see if it works. But, you know, I think we're on the verge of a major breakthrough. But we all need to keep prospecting. I just don't think we're there yet. And so what came to mind is, how many of you have watched Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? So you'll see in a second where I'm going, right? So there's a prospector, right? Yukon Cornelius in that movie. What does he do? He throws a little pickaxe up in the air, and it, it hits the ice, and then he licks it, and he goes, and he sniffs it, and then he says, nothing. Well, I feel like we're kind of there right now. I mean, we're prospecting for gold. We're really close. But it seems like, for me, we're not quite there yet. We're kind of like Yukon. I mean, we're going, there's something there, but I just haven't found it yet. So I really encourage you all to continue to look. I mean, I want to find where we're going. But I just feel like right now we're kind of still nibbling around the margins. So if I have anything to say to you, I encourage everyone, because you're all dedicated, everyone in this room, please expand your vision a little bit. Push the edge of the envelope a little bit more. We're close, but we're still kind of in the Yukon phase right now. And of course, I'm not sure if sniffing and licking a pickaxe really is a good way to detect gold, but all right, we'll leave it at that. So Tom asked me to talk about some way ahead for DoD. What are my thoughts? What's the vision? Where are we going? A really smart guy told me that you should not try to really anticipate where you're going more than about 5 years out. And it's probably closer to about 2. So I'm going to limit my thoughts to where I think we're going to be, or where we're headed in the next 1 to 5 years. I don't have to tell you, but the fiscal outlook is pretty bleak. It's not good. And I think that you're going to see further entrenchment. If anybody had a chance to look at Secretary Hagel's very first presentation as the new Secretary of Defense, he said 2 things. He said, 1, we haven't cut enough. And 2, he wants to totally look at how the Department of Defense, in particular the services, are organized. And one of the things that he said was that he wanted to look at, for example, middle management, and he wanted to look at officer to enlisted ratios, which is kind of, I mean, that kind of tells you, that gives you some clue where he wants to go. So I think that downsizing is not complete, and certainly, and what I wrote here is that we got about 1 more year. If you look at the conflict in Afghanistan, 1 year from now, you'll see spending start to decrease. Why? Because we're going to be out of there in December 2014. You're not going. At some point, you're going to go, look, I can't spend up until December 2014. So about 6 to 7 months out is when the military is going to go, look, we bought about enough, and even if I were to buy something right now, by the time I could get it in the theater, there's nobody there. So I think you've got about a year where the Department of Defense will continue to have available dollars to spend on overseas contingency operations, but at that point, it's going to dry up pretty well. The other thing is, a lot of us, I look at the age of people in here, a lot of us experience something called the peace dividend. How many people know what the peace dividend is? That's interesting. You know, I don't know if you turn around, Steve, but there's only about 4 or 5 people that raise their hand. All right, so what's a peace dividend? What's a peace dividend? Well, after a time of conflict, all the other sectors of the government, all the other sectors of society that have essentially kind of given so that we can be successful in combat, we'll want to see those resources come back to them. So there's a peace dividend coming. I mean, that's a nice term for what we're going to see in the next 1 to 5 years, is that society is going to say, look, you spent enough on defense. In fact, you spent on it for over 11 years. It's time to pay back to society in areas where maybe we haven't had enough resources to deal with. So a peace dividend is coming. What I've been saying for about a couple of years is go, look, yes, take the peace dividend, but carve a little bit out. And carve a little bit out because what we have is a really unique capability within our force. I mean, we have majors, junior majors, that have experienced nothing but a combat environment for their entire career. So we need to carve just a little bit out from the peace dividend to make sure that our warfighters continue to keep their capabilities home. So I'm only saying that to you because I would suggest that in whatever circles you communicate with, that you say the same thing. Don't allow, what happens a lot of times with peace dividends is they take too much. I mean, so we got to say, look, you're right, you need to reduce funding on defense, but on the other hand, let's keep just a little bit to maintain that invaluable expertise that you can't get it any other way. If you look at the defense strategy published in January 2012, you can see a refocusing of our effort. Now, obviously, counterinsurgency, unconventional warfare, it's still there. But if you read between the lines in the strategy, from my perspective, it is a look toward a more conventional fight, isn't it? It's telling us, guys, you've done this counterinsurgency thing, but you also, and what has atrophied a little bit is your conventional capability. So the strategy really kind of tells the services, which is something they want to do anyways, which is go back to those pre-9/11 roots. Go back to your capabilities to conduct major operations. I like to use a rubber band analogy. So this rubber band has been stretched. I mean, the services have been stretched when it comes to dealing with a counterinsurgency perspective. And some of it is stress on the force, and some of it is doing something that is not exactly what they feel to be in their wheelhouse. Now, the rubber band's going to come back, but it's not going to come back all the way because it's been stretched. But what I'm seeing is that there is some beginnings in the services from the leadership that says all that counterinsurgency stuff, it's nice, but we're not going to, it's almost like we did after Vietnam. I mean, I'm seeing the same kinds of things. I'm hoping that our office can continue to say, look, we learned a lot in conflict over the last 11 years, and we have to remember that. The other thing that I'm seeing is another sector. So you got one sector of the services that's saying, look, let's get back to our roots, let's get back to offense and defense. Yes, stability is on par, but I also see it being not as, it's not exactly being adhered to, I think. This is my perception. On the other hand, there's a very small contingency within the services that talks about security force assistance. So if you look at the likelihood of what the military is going to be engaged in the next 5 years, more than likely, it's going to be in the security force assistance area. It's going to be engaging in Africa. It's going to be continual engagement in the Middle East, mostly focused on security force assistance. The Army, for example, is looking at a regionally aligned force concept, which means that they would assign brigades to actually maintain subject matter expertise in regions. Now, the focus is mostly on culture and language. But it's amazing that me, a guy wearing a suit, now I was in the Air Force for 26 years, but a guy in a suit saying, hey, don't forget that there's also something else you need to know when you look at a region, and that is, what's the adversary look like? Who's who in the suit? So when you go in there to go security force assistance, you not only have to understand how to speak and talk to the culture, the military culture and the society culture, but you got to understand, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. And it seems like we've kind of overplayed the language and culture card, and we've forgotten some of our core things, which is, regional expertise also includes what's the lay of the land. So I'll continue to push that as well. So they are looking for new mission. Because if you've been in a conflict, think about it. I mean, if you've been doing something at a very high up tempo for 11 years, and all of a sudden you're not doing it anymore, it's just like exercising, right? I mean, you're going to want to go, look, I want to go out and continue to exercise. I don't want to sit in the barracks. That's going to happen. So I think that the military will, to some extent, based on funding, continue to look for missions, for external missions. not at the sake of the reset of the force, but they're going to continue to look for external missions because they want to keep those capabilities home. I will also tell you that we've been told that do not reduce the number of exercises and engagement overseas. Continue to make sure that there's U.S. presence in things that we've signed up to do. That's going to be hard, particularly as you diminish resources. And as I said, ironically, it is, and mostly this SFA mission is a ground force mission, so Marines and the Army. But it is kind of ironic that they want to go back to the conventional routes, but they're still trying to embrace the security force assistance mission. So we'll see where that goes, and we'll see how long that push can endure beyond budget cuts that are coming. For you guys, I'm probably not going to tell you something you don't already know, but I'll say it anyways, just to reinforce that. So if the spending in the military goes down in the next 1 to 5 years, and we're not buying a lot of big ticket items, then how do you survive? How do you survive? How do I keep the initiative on what you're doing? Well, when I was thinking about this last night, I said you got to look for others. You got to look for surrogates in other sectors, right? And you can't look to the DoD. So what are the surrogates in other sectors where they could use your capabilities but not necessarily have a military application? So I wrote down a couple of thoughts. I'll talk a little bit about them, but it's probably not anything new to you. So automation and robotics, big time. Think about it. I mean, there's no doubt that, and somebody, I think, where's Richard? Richard asked me, he goes, I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think the ratio of robots to people will be, 2 years from now or 5 years from now? It's probably going to be greater, people to robots. It's probably going to be 1 to 2 or 1 to 3, isn't it? I don't know what the ratio is right now. It's probably nothing. But my guess is robotics and automation, not only is that something in the other sectors, but it's certainly something in the defense sector, isn't it? Telecommunications. I mean, when you think about the fact that these little handheld things you walk around with, where are we going with that? Energy, resource sector. Well, and I'll talk about this in a second, but one of the things I'm working on is transitioning service members. How many people know that there is a huge oil rush in what state?
North Dakota.
Who said it? North Dakota. That's right. Texas too, and Montana to a lesser extent, the eastern part of Montana. They cannot get enough people up there to meet the demand signal for energy production resources. Cannot get enough people up there. When I in the 80s, when I was flying B-52s in that area, in North Dakota, it was known for two things: farms and miles of nothing. I hope I don't offend anybody from North Dakota, but that's what was up there. And now they can't get enough people up there to mine the energy resources. Got a phone call from Canada. We want your veterans to come out and work for us. Really? Yep. We have our province has 3 million people in it, and there's no way, based upon our energy resource production capabilities, that we can source the labor that we need from a population of 3 million people. And I had to clean my ears out, but he said the average salary up there was $200,000 a year. That's what he said. Really? So the energy resource business is something we need to think about. And why do they want our veterans? For a couple of reasons. One, they need off-road drivers. People that know how to drive a heavy vehicle on unimproved roads. Cool. And they feel that, particularly the veterans from the combat arms, outstanding leadership skills, outstanding cognition and decision-making skills. ability to work effectively as a team. Those are things that are hard to find in the private sector. Because where do you get them? How do you get those skills in the private sector? But you get them real quick if your very life depends on your ability to do those three things. So that's some of the reasons why they want our view. I think some of you are already in the medical area. That's certainly, it continues to be an area that I think needs to be mined. The other thing I put it was production technologies. How many people live, State of the Union. Did the President talk about a production technology in the State of the Union? Anybody know? Okay, well I'm going to give you a quote from the speech. It says, 3D printing has the potential to revolutionize the way we make almost everything. He said that in the State of the Union. He's right, isn't he? So I think production technologies is another area. Why? And how does that help the military? If you can ship bulk resources and then produce the kinds of things that you need on site, that cuts down a lot on logistic costs. And if you know anything about logistics costs and supporting a military, it's damn expensive and it's dangerous. So production technology is an interesting area. Cyber. I got a task right now to grow 6,000 cyber people. I've been told 3 years. The services want to do it in 4. The cyber commander wants to do it in 2. And I think we can actually start something in 6 months if we just put our mind to it. But we need a learning technology that can accelerate the ability for one to be. And I'm not talking about cyber Jedis. I'm talking about cyber engineers. There's a big difference. We can produce a cyber engineer pretty quickly. But what I really need is some learning technologies that help us accelerate that learning process. Mind fitness. This is an area we're just starting to learn a little bit more about. It's a soft skill. There's not a lot of big money in it. But there's someone in here, and I think Nolan will talk about it and others about, he has something called Brain Rush. I'll guarantee you that those are things that help us with fitness of the mind and improving agility of thought, concentration, focus, etc. Why do I think it's important? Because if you're on patrol and your mind is wandering off somewhere, you're not focusing on the here and now, you're probably bad things are going to happen to you. So what mind fitness does for you is it forces you to refocus your mind on the here and now, so that when you're on patrol, you can see that threat coming. While I've been talking, I guarantee your mind has wandered off about 5 or 6 times since I've been up here talking. Easily 5 or 6 times. If you realize that you're doing that, you can force your mind back to focus on not only what I'm saying, but the environment around you. So mind fitness is something that we need to look at, particularly when you look at a downsized force that needs to be more capable. Another nice little metaphor I use is, we used to be able to be bulls in a china shop because we could buy the china shop. I don't believe we have the fiscal environment to do that anymore, which means that we really do have to work on how do we make better decisions up front? How do we anticipate needs? Things like mind fitness help us do that. All right, so Tom, where's Tom? Tom, that's what I got for you. I got a couple. The next thing I'm going to go on to my next.
And if you take some questions, we appreciate it.
I'm going to go on to my next step, and I'll go through this quickly. But you asked me to talk about vision. That's what I see. I don't know if it's right or not, but that's what I'm saying. So, virtual framework. Tom talked a little bit about that. I think the key to virtual technologies, virtual gaming technologies, is the ability for the one each 11 Bravo infantry soldier, be it a platoon sergeant, be it a squad leader, be it a company commander, they've got to be able to create their own scenarios at home without having to go to a proprietary company or a piece of software that takes a year to change and then it comes back to you. You've got to have agility to be able to give the end user the ability to use the system the way they want to see it. And if anything knows about innovation, you know that you field a capability to do one thing, and then smart people in the field like make it 20 times better because they discover things that you would have never thought of on how to use it. But if you don't allow the end user to play with it, you won't get that innovation. So I really encourage all of you to think about the business model you're using and go on one that focuses on the user. I mean, look at the app, the whole app craze. It focuses on the user, right? The user votes which one's the best. That's an interesting business model, and it's not one that I think has promulgated to the larger industry leaders. Something to think about. What I want to do with the virtual framework, one of the biggest things is there is 11 years of experience locked up in all these people sitting in barracks come December 2014. And that information is going to go away because few of them are going to document their experiences. But what happens if you had a virtual framework where I could build a vignette that allowed me to describe in a virtual environment what I learned in those 11 years? You know, what was that one thing that I saw in combat that I think everybody else needs to know about? But squad leaders and these young soldiers, these 18 to 30-year-old people, and by the way, you all know this. I mean, this is their environment. They're comfortable in this medium. Give them an opportunity to document what they've learned so that those lessons are not lost. The other thing that I want to do, and by doing that, you take these 18 to 30-year-olds that already have a tendency toward technology, and you teach them a little bit about programming. Teach them a little bit about how to build their own things. So it becomes, you get a twofer out of it. You get to capture the lessons learned, and they also self-teach themselves on how do you program. And some may have an interest for it. I'll give you an example. Alan Kay. How many people know who Alan Kay is? How many people know that Alan Kay was in the United States Air Force? How many people know that Alan Kay was in navigation school? How many people know that when he got into the military because he thought he could go get a PhD after serving for 2 or 3 years, well, they changed the rules on him. So he quit navigation school and became an enlisted Air Force member. Then he took a test that was developed by IBM that measured your propensity to be a programmer. He maxed the test out. No one had ever done that. And the rest is history. But he would not have been identified if someone didn't give him a test on whether or not he was a good programmer. I'm not sure. I mean, he might have done something different. But the military was the one that actually first identified his ability to have skills in programming. So this virtual thing, it might be silly, but I mean, the personal computer is a multi-trillion-dollar industry that he and about 25 other people started in the Xerox Park. So, I mean, it's out there. We just got to give these people some opportunities to understand what's out there. I also like this instrumentation of a virtual framework. So how many people have read Ender's Game? A lot of people. So what happens if you were to instrument people's performance in the virtual world? Ender's Game like, right? What happens if we were able to blend reality and virtual worlds? So there was and I won't say the names of the companies, but there was a proposal about a year or so ago where where a company, an entertainment company, was going to do a television show linked to World of Warcraft. And what was interesting about the concept was the TV show would actually reflect what was going on in World of Warcraft in near real time. And the World of Warcraft game would also show what was going on in the TV show. Interesting concept. Blending reality and virtual environment. But it's something I think we need to look at. Habitual templates, that's the other thing I like about virtual framework. So what do I mean by that? you can observe behavior, cultural, tendencies. One of the things that I was talking to one of my staff about was geography-driven balance. And he said Patton was a genius at looking at a map and going, there's going to be a battle range. And he was right, like almost every time. But could you use the virtual framework to kind of train people to think in that way? I mean, I would take another example. There was these Dutch folks got ambushed in a pass in Afghanistan. There was a similar ambush a couple of months earlier in almost the same location. In fact, as the guy was driving up the hill, he could see the hulk of the other vehicle. And right as he said something about, hey, that's where they got ambushed, 2 months ago, he got ambushed. So when they did the forensics on the site, they found AK-47 rounds, they found Enfield 303 rounds, and they found musket balls. So this particular pass had been used by the Afghans as an ambush site for years. So could you use the virtual framework to kind of teach people about that kind of recurrency, those kind of habitual templates? All right, so I got 15 minutes? So I got about 5 more minutes. So I think the virtual would also help you with anticipation. And that goes back to those habitual templates. If you have that template, then it does help you to anticipate what's coming. The last thing I'll talk about is MOOCs. And people know what MOOCs are. MOOCs and transmedia learning. So MOOCs are massive open online courses. There's 3 big companies that are doing it. I think Udacity, edX, and Coursera. They're the 3 that are 3 biggies. There's a lot of other people doing it, but those are the kind of the pioneers. But they were talking about the fact that you could open up courses and people who would never have access to world-class learning suddenly have access. But for me, what intrigued me was the fact that underlying this was this whole transmedia. What I mean by transmedia experience is they were using blogs, they were using social networking, they were using posts. When you have a class, a 50,000 person class, do you think a single instructor can possibly mentor, teach, and correct, the papers of 50,000 students? So what they started to do is they leveraged the social networking capabilities to use subject matter experts within the teaching, within the classroom audience to help other students. And in fact, the instructors in some cases would actually, if they agreed with the blog post, they would say, this is a certified answer. Yep, it's good to go. Listen to what this person is telling you. That's what's really cool about me. So what they started to do was use not only this online course thing, which is mildly interesting, but they started to harness the power of the students themselves to teach others. And they use social media to do it. So we coined this term transmedia learning. I mean, we stole it from transmedia storytelling. But it is transmedia learning because you're using different types of learning technologies to fill gaps and to complete the story, which is what transmedia storytelling does. So the last thing I'll leave with you is a really cool term that I like that a guy named Peter Zatko, how many people know who Peter Zatko is? Well, you would know who he is. Peter Zatko is probably a god among gods in the cyber hacking world. He spent 3 years in DARPA. If you go look him up, he just left DARPA. I think he's going to go work for Motorola. But he and I were talking about how do you get change? How do you get people energized? And he gave me a term. He said subversive transition. I'm like, really? Subversive transition? What's that? He said, subversive transition is if you want change in an organization, the best way to do it is go find someone who's hungry and who's really good, but has been underappreciated. And give them some resources. Shine the spotlight on them. And I said, well, that's interesting, because it's been done to me, and I've done it to others. But essentially what the concept is that if you can highlight one of these high performers and they start moving out and get in front of everybody else, the institution will go, well, who are they? And why are they out in front? So we got to do something about it. And that energizes them to catch up and maybe even pass where these people are going. So he coined the term, I don't know if it's a real term or not, but he called it a subversive transition. This community needs to think long and hard about how do we do a subversive transition in the technology area you're in. And I will do it, and if you can highlight your best practices to me, I'll do whatever I can to help you get recognition and to help move the ball forward. But based upon what I just talked about you in the beginning, we got a tough transition. We got a tough road to hoe the next 1 to 5 years. It's going to be pretty bleak. So if we don't find those gems out there, we're just going to be marching in place for a couple of years. So that's all I have. Turn over to you. What do you got?
We've got about 10 minutes for questions.
What?
Elaine,
it's not,
please.
I'm a plant.
She is a plant.
So, thank you very much for your presentation. It was really interesting and inspiring. And as you know, I'm very interested in transmedia learning. And I liked very much the comment that you made about blending the real and the virtual.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could say a little bit about transmedia learning and how transmedia learning might be allowing people to learn across blending those environments.
You always give me hard questions. That's not a softball. I think, to me, I'm a believer in constructivist education, which means that in order to actually understand something, you got to put your hands on it. You got to do it. It's not enough just to go to school and go, hey, I learned this. I'm great. I know everything. I think you really have to put your hands on it. And the virtual environment and the real environment is a great way to put your hands on something and really understand what it is that you were taught. So I think that's where blended reality helps. And I think the other thing that blended reality helps you do is, let's take the infantryman. He goes into a concrete building, he kicks down the door, and there's a mannequin sitting in the corner. Wow. And oh, by the way, every time the only thing that he might get is they might move the mannequin from that corner to that corner, right? So after the first 1 or 2 times you do that, it's not very challenging anymore, right? And it's expensive to try to reconfigure that real environment. But if you could blend reality where the room is empty, but you're presented with a virtual host of good guys and bad guys, and you change it up every time you go into that room, now you're turbocharging the ability to train those folks, and you're doing it rather cheaply. And it can be done in seconds, not in days and months. So that's kind of where I think we need to go. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
What else? Sir?
You talked about the budget environment. You talked about, it's not over. We've got several years of probably austere budgets. You could look at that also as an opportunity for this industry. Because what I see happening is with less O&M dollars, which translates to readiness and training, you got to find a new way to do it. You got to find a new balance between live and simulation. After 11 years of war, everybody's coming home. You're going to put all those soldiers back in their garrison, and they're not going to be able to travel to the National Training Center to do live training because it's too expensive to travel in the austere budget environment. So there's an opportunity, I think, for new and innovative ways of training at home station, and simulation is part of that answer. So I look at the challenge, but I also look at an opportunity that this crowd ought to be interested in, and it feeds off a lot of these technologies that this conference is dedicated to.
Right.
What can we do in an immersive environment that doesn't require 10,000 acres of brain space? What can we do in a room smaller than this with a squad of soldiers in an immersive environment to provide some level of training? I'm not suggesting. I was a fighter pilot for 34 years, and I'll be damned if you were ever going to take all my flying time away. But the balance between real flying and simulating is going to start to do this. Okay, so I see it as an opportunity. I just asked for your comments on that.
It's definitely an opportunity. And I think you're exactly right. The right way to, another way to do the subversive transition is to tell the green ice people that there's a return on the investment. You can actually save money by doing this. The problem is that there's very few empirical data that shows that's a true statement. And almost all your green ice people are from Missouri, right? That you got to show me before I believe you. So I do encourage you to think about going through the numbers and saying, look, this is how it could save money. And again, if you go back to what you were saying, which is and I'll tell you the other thought I had. This is the thought. The technology that we're fielding cannot be maximized in the current open air training environment. What do I mean by that? The Joint Strike Fighter has such a sophisticated weapon system that if you lock up a concrete and Lego target set on our traditional ranges, it'll go, that's a pile of junk. So you don't tweak any of the weapon system, sophistication of weapon system, which has heat sensors and optical sensors and shape sensors and all these other things. So one of the things that I've been trying to push is you're going to have virtual insertion of target capabilities to do augmented reality training, so that the weapon system gets tweaked to its maximum potential, and the operator gets to see how that system works every day. It goes back to that innovation thing. You know, if it's just dropping a Mark I bomb out there, and you just press the pickle button, not much training there. But if you can use the richness of the sensor system and its targeting capabilities, now people are going to innovate because you're going to want to do more. So that's the other reason.
Probably time for one or two more questions. Yes, sir. Smokey.
Sir, thank you very much. What opportunities are you looking at outside the DoD across other federal agencies to leverage a lot of the same technologies for where you're looking to go with this?
Okay, so one of my biggest partners in cyber is a little organization called the Department of Homeland Security. So I recently hooked up with them. I mean, when you look at it, it's very interesting. I mean, I'll tell you just a second, but DHS actually has the primary mission for national security for cyber. In DoD, we'll only take on the mission if there's potential for significant loss of life or significant damage to the infrastructure and the well-being of the United States. It's kind of interesting. So the first line of defense for cyber is in two areas. One, the private sector, everybody in this room. You're the first line of defense. And then the next layer is really run by DHS. And then the third layer is the DoD. So in the cyber area, in fact, they're a little bit out ahead of us because they realize they have a recruitment problem too. So DHS is one of the areas where I partner very closely with, particularly in the cyber environment. In the security force assistance and the development areas, obviously the State Department and USAID are great partners in that area. You know, Commerce and Justice and others have some feedback. But right now, my main players in the security force assistance area are working very closely with state and aid.
So you've got definitive projects in which you're working towards material solutions that support both.
Definitely on cyber training and recruitment. I mean, I had a great meeting with Jake Braun, who's the head of DHS's training and cyber area, and we're arm in arm on how to tackle this problem. And a lot of what he wants to do is go out to the states. He actually wants to. He's like, look, it's just what I just said. The first line of defense is not in Washington D.C. It's in the hinterland, and a lot of it is a state. A lot of the state has responsibility for ensuring that at least it's part of the contribution to security.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we need to stay there a second. I hope I'm not giving you something you got last time, but this is a City by Design. It's an architectural look at Orlando, the city beautiful.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Timon has one.